The effects of social class and inequality, cultural difference and identity, and gender in the Australian education system, with reference to the textbooks Education, Change and Society, the 3rd edition. Chapter 5, Social Class and Inequality. Social class is understanding the division of people based on their social position, such as socio-economic status, disadvantages, and location. This is also known as social stratification. Max Weber, German theorist, said that there were more than 2 class divisions. He proposed that society is made up of 4: upper class, upper middle class, and lower class. Education and social mobility. Social mobility is the movement of individuals and groups between different class positions. Education should provide equitable opportunities for students to move upwards into a different class position. However, it is more common for students who have lower status or wealth to have less of an opportunity to move up in their social position. Schooling and social class. According to theorist Pierre Bourdieu, class power in the education system is accumulated through the interrelated resources of cultural capital, social capital, and economic capital. Social capital are resources and support that is available through group membership, networks, and relationships. Cultural capital is the forms of knowledge, skills, dispositions, and social tastes a person has, whereas economic capital are resources available to access and develop forms of high cultural capital. Whereas theorist Basil Bernstein highlights educational codes or rules, explicit or hidden, these codes within the school system refer to school practices and knowledges that are valued, such as language, interaction, and social and cultural dispositions. These codes allow schools to produce certain expectations and establish power in the classroom. In response to Bernstein's theory of educational codes, Lisa Delp explores how these codes produce a culture of power in schools through talking, writing, dressing, and interacting. Teachers are encouraged to develop an empowering pedagogical practice to control students' conduct and knowledge, alongside with the support and power of the curriculum to determine what knowledge is valued. As a pre-service teacher, I need to recognize and prevent power between student social groups from putting students who are disadvantaged in an undervalued position within the education system. Schooling and social class in the 21st century. Although Australia is a wealthy nation and have been working towards providing equal education opportunities for all students, there is still a large gap between the highest and lowest performing students. It has been recognised that students whom are struggling within the education system are often Indigenous or of a low socio-economic status. The difference between performances of schools within Australia largely depends on the schools' locations, as people with similar socio-economic statuses tend to live in particular suburbs. The Australian Government in 2008 established a My School website, which provides parents, carers, and teachers with information on schools, such as the school's socio-economic characteristics, due to the school's location and the number of students enrolled, as well as the ratio of Indigenous students and students from non-English speaking backgrounds. Private education versus public education. Maggie Cullingham, author of The Top Schools, Top Because Someone Has to Be Bottom article, creates a public awareness of what divides public schools and private schools. Cullingham notes that private schools tend only to accept students who have high academic results and are predominantly from an upper or middle class family. In contrast, public schools take on all learners, bright students and students who are disadvantaged. What the public don't realize here is the difference between academic results between the private and public school is not the education. However, it is the difference in social class between the school systems. This example represents the idea that public schools are working harder to provide equitable education for all students. Challenging social class and inequality. To challenge and overcome social class and inequality in the education system and within a classroom, the teacher needs to understand the various dynamics that are within these environments. Teachers need to develop pedagogical practices that are based on a student's intellectual quality and value each student's social differences. The relevance of social class and inequalities to me as a pre-service teacher. I want to encourage you to watch this YouTube video in your own time. This video displays a real-life example of social class and inequalities. It shows how upper or middle-class students are given more opportunities and those who are disadvantaged have to work harder to get in front. As a pre-service teacher, it is my role to support all my students regardless of their social class. I need to provide everyone with equitable learning opportunities. And yes, this means providing more support for those who are disadvantaged to overcome obstacles such as social class, gender, and ethnicity. But with perseverance, the different results in education outcomes will not be due to students' social circumstances. Chapter 6: Cultural Differences and Identity. Culture has been defined by the textbook Education Psychology by Sue DeStresses and Anne McCow as systems of knowledge, beliefs, values, and behaviors shared by a group of people. Cultures of Australian education. Australia is built up of many cultures. Some of these cultures consist of Indonesian, Italian, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, Greek, Chinese, and Islamic. These are only to list a few, there are many more. Implications for education. Although it is wonderful that Australia is built up of many cultures, sadly there are still implications that arise, such as discrimination, bullying, racism, and cultural barriers. Cultural barriers not only affect teacher-student relationships, but can also have an impact on parent-teacher relationships and the student's ability to form peer relationships. To cater for cultural barriers, extra support systems need to be put in place within schools, such as translators, to cater for the language barriers. Australian schools can find it difficult to find appropriate qualified teachers who can support the learning of the students from diverse backgrounds. From my practicum experience, I have learned that informally examining students is crucial to gathering data on a new student's prior learning experience and their capabilities. Although this can take quite some time, it is important for teachers to go through this process to ensure the students' learning needs can be met. Australia has also a number of cultural-specific schools, such as an Australian Islamic school. The overall performance of these schools are producing high academic results. However, the challenges that these schools face within Australia is their ability to access resources such as textbooks. Most of their education resources need to be imported from overseas. Effective multiculturalism in education. Schools play an important role in valuing and respecting diverse cultures, as well as promoting multiculturalism. With reference to the textbook Education Psychology, teaching styles, implicit beliefs, content, student attitudes, and the school culture must all be considered in order to have effective multiculturalism within a school structure. Banks and McGee-Banks proposed a model of multicultural education in 2012. This model consists of 5 components: knowledge construction, prejudice reduction, an empowering school culture, an equity pedagogy, and content integration. For myself and my own teaching strategies, I have decided to add two-way learning into this model. Two-way learning is a teacher recognizing that they too are learning about another culture just as their students are. To promote two-way learning is to adapt your pedagogy in order to teach using components from diverse cultures. How cultural difference and identity affects me. I grew up in a small country town which has a population of 2,600 people. The small town I call home is mostly populated by white Australians. Due to the lack of previous exposure to cultural differences and identity, I feel as though I have a lot to learn. Living in Sydney for the previous 5 years, I have come across many different nationalities whom have kindly exposed me to their culture and their identity, such as Thai culture, Assyrian culture, and Indian cultures, as well as the religions Buddhism, Muslim, and Jehovah's Witness. As a pre-service teacher, I believe I need to learn more about different cultures and how I can adapt my pedagogy to include diversity and to understand the learning needs of students from different cultures that I will be teaching. Chapter 8: Gender. According to the textbook Education, Change and Society, gender is a socially constructed category that defines what it means to be a man or a woman within a particular community at a particular time. People see gender as how a real man should behave, such as brave, protective, and how a real woman should behave in everyday society, such as nurturing and passive. Queer theory. Queer theory establishes that our sex is not what determines our gender. However, it is how we choose to represent our gender through our behaviors, for example, displaying lesbian, gay, or transgender behaviors and characteristics. Queer theory challenges the heteronormativity within a community, which is the assumption that one can only be normal through conformity to a culturally endorsed heterosexual ideal. Schools as gendered organizations. Gender regimes is a pattern of gender relations embedded by historical origins, administrative structures, and cultural traditions. Gender patterns in schools have been embedded throughout history. Although gender regimes can change, some patterns will remain consistent for a long time. An example of a gender regime that I have experienced as a pre-service teacher was within an all-boys Catholic school. The school's motto was to be the best man that you can be. Daily, this statement was reinforced with words such as being strong, protective, and respectful of women. In private discussion with a male teacher at the school, I asked him, "What is it to be the best man that you can be?" He responded with similar words, being strong, protective, and respecting women. However, through further discussion, we challenged this thought. We were able to remove the gender stereotype from the definition of the motto and replace it with words such as being honest, open, humble, and persevering. I learnt a lot from this discussion. I learned that although it was in an all-boys school, we still need to be mindful of how we present gender to the students, and our language is what can create a gender-neutral environment. Schools face the issue of having subjects identified as boy-specific, such as physics, computer science, wood, and metalwork. These are often linked to occupations that are traditionally gender segregated. To create a gender-neutral school, schools need to encourage and promote these boys' subjects as suitable for girls too. Other ways of generating a gender-neutral environment within the classroom is through our language and teaching strategies. For example, from the Education Change and Society textbooks, teachers should say, "I treat them all as individuals," rather than saying, "I don't treat boys and girls differently." And teachers should also consider conducting mixed group activities of boys and girls within the class. Feminization of teaching. It has been a popular concern that within schools there is a lack of male role models for boys. Due to this, the assumption has been made that this has caused girls to become more academically successful than boys. This assumption has been identified as inaccurate through surveys and studies. However, according to the textbook Education Change and Society, leadership positions such as principals and deputy principals are usually males. This has been identified as being due to males promoting a masculine image of discipline and control that appears to positively affect the academic results of students. Bullying, gender, and sexuality. Bullying is the act of physical and psychological harm to another, which can cause long-term effects on the social development and mental health of both the victim and the bully. Generally, people bully due to a lack of self-esteem and to boost a sense of power. From recent studies, at least 50% of Australian children experience bullying at some point in their schooling, and that boys are more likely to speak out about their experience as a victim or a bully. From surveys, it has been found that approximately 50% of gay and lesbian young people have been verbally and/or physically abused at school due to their gender. Surveys also discovered that Australian schools are lacking support or advice for these people. It is important for schools to recognise gender and promote gender differences. This can be achieved through gay and lesbian teachers being open with their students and making gender differences the norm. The gender gap in high school completion. According to the New South Wales Government Education and Learning Report on Women in New South Wales, in 2015, more girls completed secondary school compared to boys. Statistics from the New South Wales Department of Education shows that in 2016, the HSC completion rates for girls is significantly higher than boys. But why is this? Well, with reference to the textbooks, Education Change and Society, these numbers are due to boys who were struggling with school during Year 10, finding it easier to leave school and obtain full-time employment or an apprenticeship. Girls who are struggling just as much as the Year 10 boys do have the same option to leave school and enter an apprenticeship. The percentage of girls that leave school early is lower. This is because it is harder for girls to be accepted in the workforce for an apprenticeship or for full-time employment. This is partly due to gender segregation in trades. The New South Wales Government Education and Learning Report on Women in New South Wales discusses a large gap between young women and men completing trades, apprenticeships and traineeships, with only 12.4% of young women completing, while 87.6% of young men complete their trade. Social class and inequality, cultural difference and identity, and gender are issues being faced within Australia and the Australian education system. Teachers need to be aware of these issues and how they can be addressed within the education system and within the classroom in order to create a society that generates equitable opportunities for the disadvantaged, promotes multiculturalism and gender equality. Adapting pedagogical practices and teaching strategies to cater for individual students' needs and differences is simply the beginning of developing a socially just education system and country. As a pre-service teacher, my goal is to support all my students and to assist their learning and personal development. Taking into account these issues will enable me to be aware of a number of differences and challenges that my students may face. Being aware of these challenges will assist me in modifying my language, pedagogy, and support networks to cater for my students' needs.